So hi there. I'm Kim Ernest. I'm a licensed psychologist here in the state of Pennsylvania. I am also the host of the How to Be Happy Hour, as well as the executive vice president of Pennsylvania Counseling Services. I'm here today to film episode 2 or part 2 of our 3-part series looking at kids in crisis, really discussing the mental health crisis and how it is impacting the youth in the United States.
I'm Tiffany Lutz. I am with Pennsylvania Counseling Services, working in the facilities department. I'm also the mother to 4 beautiful children. I have an older child, he's 21, and then we have quite a gap. We have a 14-year gap, and then we introduced our triplets 7 years ago. So, mother of multiples.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Victoria Miller. I'm the Senior Clinical Director of IBHS here at PA Counseling. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst and also a mom.
Hi, I'm Melinda Curran. I am a 5th grade teacher in an urban school district here in central Pennsylvania, and I have 2 children, a 12-year-old middle schooler and a 7-year-old elementary schooler.
Hi, I'm Carrie Meehan. I'm a forensic therapist, and I'm also a mom of 2 and a newly minted grandmother of 1, as well as a former foster mom.
I didn't know you were a foster mother once upon a time. So, we are here today to further the conversation. We started in our last episode talking about that we are seeing like unprecedented levels of child and adolescent anxiety and depression. We're seeing an increase in self harm and suicidal behavior from that particular population, as well as just this overarching lack of resources and accessibility to services for many of the clients and communities that we're working within. And so, as we start to discuss some of the barriers that we're seeing show up for our children, where do we think that we need to have really big eyes for the systemic factors that are contributing to the suffering and challenges that they are presently facing?
I would say a lot of it now, especially, comes from social media and outside influences, things that aren't real life necessarily. So I know when we were growing up, we would have our friends' stories as we're hanging out with our friends and hanging out with their families, and we would get a little taste of differences that way. But now our kids are watching, my kids' favorite thing is to watch YouTube, and they watch all these families. And what I have to keep trying to remind them is that you don't see everything. Those parents fight with their kids. Those kids fight with their parents as well. You know, they have to still clean their rooms. They have to eat dinner. You don't see that, though. They're not going to show you everything. They're going to show you what they want you to see to get likes and to get views. And if you only see all the good stuff, comparison is a thief of joy. But our kids are going to do that. Our kids are going to compare, and that's tough.
I see that at home with my own children, but I also see that in the classroom with my 5th graders. I have sort of an interesting lens to look through in that I was absent from the classroom for 10 years for various reasons, and then I went back this past year, and a lot of people have asked me, like, what's the difference in the last 10 years? And to me, like, there's a stark difference in the behavior of the children and just their lack of motivation to do things that are just sort of necessary. Like, clean up after yourself. And, because they're on TikTok or they're on YouTube or they're on, social media, and they see this highlight reel of all the fun stuff that everybody's doing. And they don't want to get down to the nitty gritty and sort of get that satisfaction from actually accomplishing something that was kind of hard for them. But, if they actually did it and worked through it, they might feel a little proud about themselves. But they kind of avoid that because it's just frustrating and hard at first.
Yeah, one of the studies I looked at with regards to just electronics and behavior, I think it might have been in the lens of ADHD even, but one of the things it said, which from a behavioral perspective clicked with me, was kids who are using a lot of electronics, whether it's phones, tablets, computers, it affects their delay to gratification. And so you're used to clicking, getting, clicking, something pops up, or you get a right answer and there's confetti. We don't always do confetti when you get 2 + 2 is 4. It's just like, that's right, good job. Like you're saying, that intrinsic piece may be affected. And then when you go to more traditional methods of instruction, it's like, this is boring. And I've heard from different educators, and I kind of feel this in training sometimes. Like, I feel maybe I need to entertain versus teach. Like, I feel like just straight up teaching is maybe not as exciting, or it's not what the audience is looking for. But I definitely see with kids, and my mom is a preschool teacher, 3 and 4-year-olds, doing preschool things is usually, exciting, and you see a lot of enthusiasm. She said, my kids will now say, this is boring at age 3 and 4, where I remember preschool was awesome. Cut and paste, the
Scissors?
the parachute, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
But she said kids are saying they're bored.
And like to piggyback off of that, like I have 5th graders that don't have the motor skills to use scissors properly, and they're 11 years old. And so, I mean, like, just giving our kids the screens this early, and like, sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, like, I have kids, like, it's a good babysitter when you need to get shit done sometimes, but other times, like, they should be like building with blocks and Legos and playing with paste and learning how to cut and glue so that they have those skills later on.
That has been so we are rounding. Yesterday was my last day of traditional homeschool. We survived. We made it through. My kids have an option for the fall, and I think we're, at least for now, settled for where we need to be next. But so many times, because I was homeschooling, but I was also working full time, and it turns out 7-year-olds are shit at keeping themselves busy, especially right now. And so,
Unless you have multiple ones of them.
unless there are multiple ones of them, and then they get a little too quiet at times, I'm sure. But I just remember looking at him and being like, buddy, you have a huge house. Go find some fun. Like, you've got toys and pets and craft supplies, and you have everything you could ever want. Go figure it out. And just this laying on the ground and be like, but if you won't let me watch YouTube, there is nothing. And so it's tough because I'm watching, right now, my kid, there's a lot of YouTube channels he really likes, and we don't limit them. Colin Furs or Mark Rober, we see those as both really educational, really positive messages. We kind of let them consume that as much as they want. And then we have other YouTube channels that aren't necessarily bad. I don't think they instill negative messages, or it's not problematic. But my kids behave differently after a 2-hour Mr. Beast marathon than when they are watching I don't know, Bluey for 2 hours. It's just a different model. And what I started noticing is we were with a bunch of family members last week, and we were on vacation and hanging out with a bunch of teenagers, which was really cool for my kids. And they all watched Mr. Beast for 2 hours. But then when they were done watching Mr. Beast, and we're like, hey, you have to leave the TV now. You have to go do something else. It was well, will you give me $5 if I make this trick shot? Or will you do this if I do that? Or can I have that? And it became very money driven, and what can I get driven? And in those same conversations with those same teenagers, they were saying well, I don't want a minimum wage job. I'm like, but you're 16. What? What do you need $60,000 a year for? And so
What special skills do you have currently?
yeah, what do you know to do? You're starting there because you're going to learn things. And well, I'm not just going to clock in and out for $9 an hour. And it's but you're getting other things for $9 an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I see that too. But on the flip side of that, 25 years ago when I was working, when I was 16, I was making $9 an hour. So I kind of get that, maybe minimum wage should be a little bit more.
I don't disagree with that. No.
Because, I could see that as, because what can they can buy, a thing as, they can barely get anything from Starbucks for $9. It's so, I get it, but also, me, I would do it for the experience, but I mean, I don't know, 16-year-olds they have a lot more than I did when I was, they have a phone to take care of, and they have, I don't know, maybe they have insurance and a car. And $9 an hour isn't going to get them very far, especially if they're my parents, and, they didn't pay for any of that stuff for me, so, I don't know.
No, I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
And that would probably be a different pod. How can we create a livable wage? So we'll put that on the back burner for the next time. And no, I agree with it, but I don't know. I just fear that like we're setting our kids up for some really unrealistic expectations when they're looking at like super yachts and giant vacation homes and like all these different things, and they're like, well, I want that, and it's like, what? And you can get that, but there's like
You have to work for it.
There's some steps along the way.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, when we were growing up, if somebody said to any of the boys in our class, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" It was and I'm not even going to limit it to boys because I see this from boys and girls, but what do you want to be when you grow up? Typical answers were policeman, firefighter, train
Astronaut.
conductor,
Teacher.
astronaut,
Yeah.
teacher. Now, I wish we had a way to everybody tally in what did your kids say? Because now they want to be YouTube stars, professional gamers. I mean, I still have, my daughter wants to be a princess. So you still have some of that, but you see that so much more. And when we were growing up, sign of the times, when we were growing up, if somebody said, well, I want to make videos on YouTube and do that as my full-time job, nobody would have taken them
Our
serious.
parents would have laughed at us.
And
Well, we
okay,
actually,
so what do you really want to do?
Yeah.
we
So-
actually encountered that with our oldest, when he was deciding what he wanted to be. And, he told my husband and I that he wanted to be a professional gamer, and so we brushed it off. We're like, okay, right, And then we thought about it. Like, he started showing us, like, different videos of how this happens. And so we took an interest in his interest to figure out what it is that he really enjoyed in it. And so I kind of helped steer him into thinking more logically. Okay, this is the dream, this is the goal, but where are you going to start to get there, like incrementally? So he had watched me in a career that was not my dream while I was achieving my dream goal to become a therapist while I was working and going to school full time. And so that helped rope him in a little bit, to understanding that very few get into that top tier of professional gaming or YouTubing or streaming on Twitch to where they can be successful. And so he does it, in his free time. But now he's a dad, so now he's learning how to even deal with that complexity. But he's learned over the years like how to rein it in and still enjoy that, gaming side, but also while making a paycheck to support his family in the meantime.
And when it comes to technology, that was one of the things that obviously prepared for a little bit here today. And so when it talks about the negative impact of technology on kids, I think each of us, at least I know I can speak for my household specifically, when the pandemic rolled around, a lot of us out of necessity, and I will say the Ernest household specifically out of necessity started relying significantly more on the electronic babysitter than we ever did before. And I think it's for so many of us, we were told from the beginning, and no one knew where the story was going, right? We had in March 13th, 2020, when they closed down the schools here in the state of Pennsylvania, no one had any idea what was in store for us from what happened next. But the general theme was, you're going to do this for 2 to 3 weeks, and then it'll be fine. And so, what our family, we went to the store, we bought a bunch of snacks, and we're like, hey, we're going to like have a party for 2 weeks, and then everyone's going to go back to school, and it's all going to be normal, and like, it'll be fine. And then that didn't happen. But we were already like, TV rules don't matter anymore. Or like, yeah, Bluey is your dad now. Like we tried all those different things. And now we're slowly realizing that like this was a marathon, not a sprint. But I would say it was like a year and a half in before my husband and I, it even occurred to us to like fall back and take that 10,000 foot look at the ways in which our parenting practice had changed as a result of the pandemic and the things that we were relying on out of survival that were no longer serving us. And like maybe in those early days when we had no other options, that's what we had to do. But now we need to kind of like evaluate that.
Right.
And the fact that our kids are now consuming 4 hours of screen time a day, where prior to the pandemic, no screens during the week at all, Monday through Friday. And no, other than we do a movie night, family movie night, where we all gather around the same screen. But other than that, that's one of our family anchors. We didn't get, we really fell out of all those practices, and what is the impact that that's having long term. And so the impact, based on my prep here today, the things that we've discovered is that excessive screen time, especially before bed, is really impacting kids' sleeping patterns. It's not just impacting and leading to sleep deprivation, but it's also impacting quality of sleep, as well as overall mood, cognitive functioning, and general well-being. There's also a really curious relationship between reciprocal relationship between diet and sleep. So the more tired the children become, the less likely they are to want to eat like traditionally nourishing foods. They gravitate more towards the carbs, the salts, and the sweets. And then that makes sleep worse overall. We are also seeing a huge increase in cyberbullying and online harassment. So kiddos face cyberbullying or online harassment through social media, messaging platforms, or online gaming, which increases anxiety, depression, and feelings of isolation. There is a huge correlative relationship between the advent of the selfie camera, which came on the scene in 2012, and negative self-image specifically. And there's a huge disjunct between boys and girls in this regard, with it disproportionately impacting female kids and adolescents, although male adolescents are not immune, and the LGBTQ population. So it seems to sort of disproportionately impact those kiddos and adolescents as well. We have the FOMO that is triggered by these experiences, where you get to see, I think you had mentioned, the highlight reel, and they see all the good, and then they see the kids like destroying the house. They see Mark Rober make the pool full of Robies at the end of it, but they don't see like the gallons of trash bags and the hours of cleanup that go into making this fun possible. Online gaming and gaming addiction, especially in multiplayer games. And that's something I had researched years ago. I worked on a research project called The Widows of Warcraft, and it was all about women who lost.
I used to play that.
And were you a widow temporarily?
I mean, it was before we had kids, so it wasn't like a big deal. But like, if we had kids while he was like,
Sucked into it.
Literally sucks the life out of people.
Yes,
like,
the Widows of Warcraft.
that's really funny. Yeah, I mean, he would play it for hours on end.
And you don't go in saying, I'm going to play it.
No,
you say,
no.
I'm going to play it for like 30 minutes, just knock this one thing out.
Well, and
real
it's funny
quick.
too, because like once we had kids, he was like, "Oh, I just don't have the time to play that anymore."
Oh, I
Like,
used to play World of Warcraft.
Yeah,
That's what made
it's
me
like-
curious about it.
Oh, that's
like, and
funny.
I would wake up in the morning and like, oh, I'm just going to game for an hour before work. And like, then work is at 4 p.m. and I'm like brushing my teeth as I'm running out the door. It's like, man, online predators and unsafe content, the lines in the internet. I mean, even now, the flippin' ads on some of this stuff, and it's like, this is children's YouTube. Why are you advertising Grand Theft Auto? But they are. And then just that distraction from face-to-face technology, that inability to, the waning social skills that we're seeing, kiddos not being able to have that more delayed gratification, or really struggling to communicate one-on-one interpersonally, and not just the struggle in terms of competence and confidence, but the tolerance for that. Novel social situations are uncomfortable and anxiety evoking. And everyone's like, well, I have social anxiety now. And it's like, no, you feel anxiety in social situations, which is normal. It's normal.
Yeah.
It's normal to feel weird in social situations. So
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I had a 5th grader this year, and I mean, whenever it was like you needed to present something in front of the class, well, I have social anxiety. Well, I mean, like, we've been together for like, I don't know, 6-8 months now. Like, you know, all these people, you've been to like kindergarten through 5th grade with most of them. Like, I get it. It's uncomfortable to stand in front of the class, but like, it's kind of a skill that is valuable as you get older, you know? But that was always kind of like an excuse or something that I guess she had learned to use to sort of like cop out of an activity or whatever, that if she didn't want to do it. And but like, I mean, if we don't make ourselves a little bit anxious, or we don't, you know, kind of challenge ourselves to or push ourselves through those weird, awkward things, then we're not really going to get anywhere, or feel that sense of pride or success or gratification when we're just getting it from screens, and we don't have practice doing it in like smaller settings with one-on-one.
Small, inherently safe settings, like a classroom set, like saying,
Right.
like, we have created safety. I'm not saying, like, tomorrow, unprepared, go out and do
Right.
a lecture for 5,000 people you've never met before. I'm saying, in this small context, I want you to stretch yourself.
Right.
And that's not harming our kids.
Well, and one
Yeah.
of the things that you had asked is how do we get our kids through that? Like, how do we as a parent get through that? So I'm going to be the parent in that situation. As a parent, if my daughter comes home and says, my teacher made me do something so uncomfortable today, I feel I have a lot of friends in education, and I feel like the automatic response is, she did what? And then emails are being sent to the teacher, the principal. I'm trying to cancel you. I'm stalking your social media because I want to find everything out I
Yep.
can about you so that I can put you on blast. And so I think we as parents have to be a lot more open. I
Yep.
was so lucky this year. The triplets are in 3 different classrooms, so I had 3 first grade teachers to work with, and they were amazing. So I can only speak for myself in this situation. But if, one of my kids would have came home and said, my teacher made me do something very uncomfortable today, I would have said, oh, what was it? And I would have talked about it. And if they would have explained that now through a kid's lens, that might be something different. I explained to my teacher that I was uncomfortable, and she said that everybody's uncomfortable, and she made me do it anyway. So from a kid's perspective, that's probably what it's going to be. But then we as parents can be like, oh, well, how did you feel after that?
Right.
And what did you, kind of talk through it? If it's something where they seem like they are genuinely upset, then I can still send an email and be like, hey, Hazel or whoever, let me know that she was really upset today. Like, what's your perspective on it?
Right.
Like, what's the story? So that's something, and it's not easy when we are mama bears and papa bears. So when our babies come home and they're upset, our instinct is to get those claws out. So I think as parents, to answer that question, just being a little bit more open, not instant, we talked about the instant gratification, but the flip side of that, not instant, anger, and just kind of opening that. Because there are times, I know you had some times this school year where the best case was to bring some mama bear claws out, because that is the case sometimes. But by you pushing that student, you're teaching her so much more than
Right.
just what that lesson was. She might not remember that particular lesson, but she'll remember that time that you pushed her and encouraged her, and she was able to overcome the social anxiety she says she has. That's going to stick with her a lot longer.
But I think so. You make an interesting point about like the mama bear and the claws coming out, and I mean, I did this year over what I believe were very appropriate successive approximations towards season 8 Khaleesi. I was at least season 3 there for a while. But what I will tell you is a very skilled and attuned 7-year-old that I love very, very much learned that I will mama bear when he is uncomfortable, and he used it. He went to our baseball coach, and he said, well, because my son, I told you about it, my son he's afraid of getting hit by the ball, right? A lot of kids are, but my kid's very cautious, very careful, very risk adverse, and so getting hit by the ball just hits differently for him, for lack of no pun intended. And so he went to the coach and he said, listen, my mom doesn't want me to play catcher anymore, because he got hit as a catcher, and he's all right, and he got through it. And so he went to the coach and said, well, my mom doesn't want me to play it anymore. And luckily, like, good for our coach, reached out to me and said, so I hear you don't want Silas to play catcher anymore. And I was like, oh, no. Like, that didn't come from me. He doesn't want to play catcher anymore. But you do whatever you think is right. I didn't sign up to be the t-ball coach or the baseball coach. Like, I didn't volunteer. You did. So I don't think you're harming him by making whatever decision you need to make for this team. And I trust your judgment, and I've got your back, and I will support Silas on my side of the line. But I felt like that was a really good distinction for him to see. He's like, but it scares me. And it's like, I get it. But if the coach needs you to do that, then that's what you need to do for the good of your team.
But I think also there's something to be said too about, and I try to do this as a teacher in my classroom, but I don't see this from from all of my children's teachers, because some of them have been fantastic at this, but not all of them. But I feel like the coach has done a good job of really building a relationship and giving us as parents, because my son's on the same team as Kim's, all the information we need. And I think that sometimes, or a lot of times, when teachers don't build that relationship with parents, then the parent in me is like, well, I don't know where you're coming from. So I'm going to get a little defensive if my kid comes home and is upset about something that you did because you haven't been communicating with me. But as like the teacher in me is like, well, you know, it's hard to make that communication come through to all of the parents equally. And also, all of the kids perceive your actions very differently than maybe what your intent is when you're teaching or coaching or whatever. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
Well, so what came to my mind was when I was when my kids were coming up through school, and one of the techniques I learned early on as a parent was to reach out to the teachers right off the bat. Send an email, get their contact information. Say, hey, I'm Brandon's mom. Hey, I'm Matthew's mom. Here's what you need to know about my son. And I would list off some good qualities, but also some areas where they tended to struggle. And I was like, hey, I am 100% here, to be there for my kids, but also to parallel whatever is, being taught in the classroom. And I found that when it came to those times in the school year where there was bullying or there was difficulty with academics or behaviors, that they were more likely to reach out to me, and that we could have that good dialogue so that my mama bear side didn't need to come out right away.
And that's so helpful. I mean, one of the questions I ask parents at the beginning of the year is like, what are your goals for your kids? Because like, I know what I want my students to learn throughout the year, but like that might not really be important to all the parents in my classroom. So it's like, it's so helpful to be on the same page.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to the anxiety piece. In IBHS, behavioral health, oftentimes when we see an anxious kid, there's almost always an anxious parent. And that's just one, I think that runs really parallel. If you have an anxious kid, you should examine yourself. We all do express anxiety at times, sometimes healthy, sometimes not so healthy. But thinking clinically then, my model's always ERP, exposure and response prevention. So not to the point where I'm going to traumatize my kid and make them do this really scary thing, but it is the research proven way to get through things. You don't have to love it. You don't have to even be really good at it, but just to give it a try. And I think that so many times, and it is hard at times to make the discrimination between mama bear and then do we let them fail? I think that, and then you asked for later maybe a discussion on resiliency. I think that's a big favor we can do our kids is to let them flop. So they have to know what that feels like. They have to know that it happens, that it's okay. And then how to sit with it. Like, it doesn't feel good. My intention isn't to go in and like take it all away. I know, Kim, too, you're into ACT. So part of ACT is not always having this mentality of subtraction. Like, I feel anxious, let's get rid of it. I feel sad, let's get rid of it. No, I think it's good for kids to be able to sit with feelings. If it's going on too long, okay, then we might want to take a closer look there. But to sit with the feeling and not take it away, which might go against your maternal instincts. It's hard. It's not fun.
But I think that principle of addition is so invaluable. And we frequently go to like, well, let's just get rid of that thing or let's subtract that thing. But a different like evidence-based treatment modality that I've been swimming in the soup of recently because I'm working on my certification is EMDR. And a big part of EMDR is looking back at really traumatic events, is to find a way to habituate to trauma that's already happened. And so it's not like go out and traumatize people and that'll build resiliency. That's not probably ethical. We probably couldn't study that very well. But what the research does show us is that there are times where a traumatic event could have been significantly less traumatic if certain factors were in place. And so that's something you do in EMDR before you even go into the reprocessing, before you even go into the narrative component of the story that they are telling. You do what's called an installation of a safety device, and you essentially say, like, we can't get rid of that part of your history. We can't delete the trauma. I wish we could. When we figure that out, all of our lives will be easier and better as a result, but we're not there. But if we could add something to that scenario that would have made it manageable, not desirable, not better, it wouldn't have changed the outcome or the narrative or the story, but it would have given you another tool to get through it. What would that be and what would that look like? And I think so often as parents, we fall into that, what can I delete to keep you safe? And I think the other side of what can I add to give you what you need? Because I believe you can do this. And I believe in your ability to navigate this. What tools can I give you to get you through it? And so, like in the instance of the baseball catcher, the boys wear a cup now. That's what we figured out. They're all walking around knocking on their junk. They're so into it. But that was the tool that they needed to take it from a really inherently unsafe situation and make it a safer scenario. And there's so many other instances in that. So I'm not going to email the coach and be like, yeah, don't make him a catcher. It's like, hey, you know what? I bought him a cup and he's delighted by it. So let's go that direction instead.
I like what you said, instead of the message you're saying then is, I need to handle this for you. You're not capable of handling this. But I feel there's a lot of, which ties into child mental health. Let me make things just perfect for you. Let me, talk to the teacher. Let me talk to the coach. Let me buy you the best of the best and make things perfect for you. And I think then where we see that trickle down is like we in IBHS, I call it distress tolerance, is very poor for both kids and parents. And looping back to the mentality of subtraction, when you have no distress tolerance, I mean, how can you make change? How can you make progress? A lot of the things we ask parents to do in IBHS is hard. It's really, really hard to like wait out an hour-long tantrum. It's really hard to maintain a demand, something the kid doesn't want to do. It's really hard to watch your kid scream and cry because they don't know how to communicate, but you're trying to teach them to communicate. But I think another thing we run into all the time is both on parent and child levels, distress tolerance is really low, which means potential for change isn't as great. So that in and of itself, I think, is a favor we can do for our kids. There's definitely a threshold. You don't just let them drown, but that water might have to rise a little bit and they're like, I'm okay. I'm okay. It's still here. I'm not drowning, but I do have a safe person. I do have a safe object or something that can help me when it starts to rise.
Yeah, when you talk about that frustration tolerance, it brings me back to thinking about the electronics. So, like, what we begin to teach our children at young ages is what continues to manifest as they get older. So what might be cute or tolerable when they're 2 or 3 might not be when they're 16. And we have to, I liked how you said that reevaluate, like after the pandemic, to reevaluate. And I would say that, as a parent, is a constant reevaluation, depending on how the kids' behaviors are, what I see going on, as to how I manage that. And so, like the electronics, so technology, giving them unlimited time on electronics, right? Like during the pandemic or during a stressful time, whether there's a loss of a loved one or whatever the situation may be, it can be really easy to go to that default, which may work for a season, but to be able to coach parents to move beyond that and to start to implement structure back in can help. And yeah, developing that frustration tolerance for parents. So when the kids are like, I don't know what to do, and my kids would do that all the time too. But like if you just lean into it for a little longer, their imagination will kick in, and then they get to explore creativity and all those things. But it also helps develop that frustration tolerance.
And I think I don't know. I work with a lot of parents that struggle to adequately define distress tolerance. Because I don't just want you to tolerate distress. I want you to stay in your body while you tolerate that distress. And I think that that's a really clear distinction. I think we're seeing a lot of trends coming out surrounding like gentle parenting. And I think gentle parenting's great. I mean, I did my thesis and dissertation on attachment. I am a fan of John Bowlby. I love attachment. And I believe attachment-based parenting is essential. And gentle or attachment-based parenting doesn't mean that you never correct. It doesn't mean that you never say no. It doesn't mean that when your child is melting down, you just blank out and dissociate within your own body. And so often I feel like that's how we're defining it versus like it's okay to like when my kid looks at me and says like I hate you and you bring me nothing but sadness. Like it's okay to be like, wow, that really hurt my feelings. Like you don't need to blank out and be this like robot of like stay connected, stay present, and you don't have to display zero affect. You can't lose your mind and scream and yell and throw shit, but you also don't need to be like this balanced, blanked out, like I'm not here right now, Stepford parent, essentially.
That's the reputation ABA gets
Yes.
sometimes. So, and that's, certainly nothing I would suggest. But I like to do with my kids, just like a reframe, like, wow, you seem really upset right now. Can you just tell me a little bit more what's happening? Or what would make, this is actually from Roy, what would make a boy want to say that to his mom? And I use that. And sometimes I get stuff. Sometimes I don't get anything, but it's worth a try. Curious questions.
Yes.
Family base calls them curious questions.
I always like with my kids at home. I'm not as good at this as a parent, but as a teacher, I always ask, what did you notice? Or I tell the kids, like, if they're having, like, a behavioral, like, something's going on, like, I noticed that, like, I don't know, you reacted this way when this happened or whatever. Can you tell me why you did that? So it's not, like, accusatory or, like, anything's wrong. It's just, like, I saw this happen. Can you tell me why?
What did you? But I think I would assume that you have those conversations not in the moment that they're throwing the shit at the wall, but maybe after that. And I think sometimes our timing is really off as parents. Like in the moment, where like my child would be like, "I can't survive without Mr. Beast," and it's like, yeah, but like. You can, but this isn't the moment to teach you about healthy, like, online consumption.
Wants versus needs.
Yes, this isn't the moment for that. And, like, my husband or I, like, one of us always errs in that, right? We're like, let's talk about this versus that. And, like, they're not even hearing us. They're just completely short-circuiting.
But I think that's harder to go through as a parent than it is as like a therapist or a professional because it's your kid. So like your emotions are tied up in that. But if it's somebody else's kiddo, it's not like it's not like we ignore them, but it's like it's easier to kind of have that separation between like what's best for them and like you don't have your feelings tied up in that.
That's so true. Like the emotional connection is that component we need for attachment. And yet as a professional, I can say wonderful things, but as the mom, there were times I needed that time out for myself, when I did want to throw stuff, when I did want to scream out. And I remember one time even calling my mom on my cell phone in my bedroom and I'm locked in there crying, like, I don't know what to do. Like, I swear my son was going to burn the house down kind of a thing. He was outside trying to light fireworks outside under the deck and I like...
Good context.
So, but, I mean, I've had those moments. And so a lot of times, I deal with families and the parents come in and it's like, no, I don't have it all together. As a mom, like I've definitely had my shortcomings, but, when I took a breath, when I stepped back, this is what works.
I just got back from a conference and I love going to conference, Citygate conference. We go every year. And Citygate is essentially simply missions. For the most part, they're missions that work with super disenfranchised folks, often from a faith-based perspective, and very frequently those who homelessness or like chronic homelessness. And one of the gals came to all 3 of my lectures. So I love doing the conference, but it's always a lot of work, and like you have all the times in between, and you have these little nuggets. And I had one woman that came to all 3 of my lectures and then both of Roy's. And at the end of my 3rd one, I'm like, anybody have any questions? She's like, do you have it all together in your personal life? And I'm like, oh, hell no, I'm a mess in my personal life. But I think that regulation begets co-regulation is so essential. And I'm not perfect with that with my kids. And I think I have really big eyes for it. And I try to zoom out and focus on that with me. Because I know that my go-to when I'm feeling hurt, when you hurt my feelings, I immediately go on the offensive. Like, I believe a good defense is to burn the world. And so I don't want to burn the world with my kids. I don't want to be that to them. I want to be the place where they can come and fall apart, and I bring the calm instead of showing up with more storm. And so how do I co-regulate? I've often like fantasized about like, you know, that like regulators song, like how do we like make a song that teaches parents how to get right within before we take our dysregulation to our kiddos and just like stir the pot.
And I do think though, like, and this happens as a teacher too. Like I have these 2 hats, parent and teacher, and like we lose our shit sometimes. Like we're humans. And I do think that it's important for kids to see like, all right, Miss Curran lost her shit, but like she got it back together. And I also like, I will make a concerted effort to like apologize and be like, hey guys, like I'm really sorry. Could have handled that a lot better. Next time I'm going to try and do this. Please hold me accountable. And I think it's important for them to see that like when we do fuck up and make mistakes, like we are able to like acknowledge it and hold ourselves accountable.
Kids listen to this podcast, they're going to be like, Miss Curran just said fuck. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
I may
you.
have said shit one time in class this year because I dropped a whole thing of Legos on the floor. So it won't be totally news to them.
Okay.
But yeah, like I think it's important for them to see adults like make mistakes and then appropriately like apologize or fix whatever they did. Because that's also modeling to them that it's okay to make a mistake and it's okay to own up to it, and this is how I can make it better. I can't go back and fix it, but this is how I can make it a little bit better.
Yeah, when my kids were pre-teenage, early teen years, I remember my husband and I took a shift, and the most powerful moment I think was when my husband apologized to the boys for losing his temper. Like he got a little upset, lost his temper, but his apology, he got down. He's 6'3", so he got down on his knees like to be eye level, and he apologized. And from that point forward, anytime that either of us messed up as a parent, and come in and apologize, I think we earned our children's respect, but, also show them we're human. We make mistakes. And I remember when we were fostering, our child came along with family-based services. So we had a family-based therapist in our home for a little while. And the therapist said something that really stuck with me. And he said, you don't need to be a perfect parent. You don't need to be a great parent. You need to be a good enough parent. And that really helped ease some of those anxieties as parents that we all experience.
I wish I knew that's where this, because there is a statistic out there. There's a researcher that studied this specifically. And I think it's every 2 out of every 5 interactions, if you nail it as a parent, you're doing all right. But like 2 out of 5. How many of us can't hit that?
I mean, I could do.
I can
that's
do
pretty attainable, right? Like
2 out of 5. Like the odds are in your favor then. But it's when you let the bad moments become a bad pattern of interacting, which becomes a bad relationship. And so what I'm hearing from you, or what feels most salient out of the story you just shared, is that your husband decided to interrupt the pattern of relating. Your husband said, I had a bad moment, I'm going to make it a bad moment. And I'm going to keep it as a moment versus allowing it to like generalize out and permeate through our patterns of interaction.
Yeah, and it was at that point that we realized that we were breaking intergenerational cycles in our family. In both our families, neither one of us had good models on what it is to be a good dad or a good mom. And so we started to break those cycles, and it was powerful. And now our boys, because I remember my youngest, he saw the highlight reels of everybody else, and he thought we had the worst family ever.
Of course, of course.
Because, all the mess behind the scenes, right? And now that he's a young adult and has interacted with other families out there, he realizes we're really not that bad. We're probably hitting that 2 out of 5. So, so there is hope.
It's funny you talk about the generational curses. So I remember within the past year or two, a movie came out. It was a kids movie.
Are we going to talk about Encanto?
No.
Damn.
But,
where
there's
my mind
triplets
was
in that,
going
so
to.
you know it already.
Yeah, I'm
holds
going to
dear
do a
near
whole
to-
podcast on Encanto.
Can I come back for that one?
Yes.
Because
Nobody will talk to me about Encanto.
Whew,
All right, never mind. Sorry, you were going a different way. I got really excited there.
that needs its own whole thing, and I'm here for it.
Okay.
It was a different movie, but we didn't watch it, but I saw all of the parent reviews about the negativity that it's going to teach your children.
Oh, I think I know
The
what you're talking about.
disrespect, the disgusting images. It was bad. And so my husband and I talked about it. We're pretty flexible in some ways. We are a Christian family, so we do kind of shelter our kids from some of the things that are out there today.
Yeah.
But from what I've read about the movie before it came out, I was like, this isn't adding up. And I was like, you know what? Let's watch it. Family movie night. Let's watch it. And I'm going to get my own take on this. And we watched it, and I was horrified. Not because of the reasons that I read. We get to the end of the movie. My kids were like, "Meh, whatever." All of the highlights that I was watching for, because I read, and there were these bad moments. My kids didn't pay them any attention. They were like, whatever.
Yeah.
So they were done, and I was like, "So what'd you guys think?" They're like, "Oh, it was good. Can we go play now?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, have fun." My husband and I sat and talked about it. And I said, as a parent, and socially I'm a little bit more open when it comes to parenting. I can be somewhat of a prude a little bit. But I said to my husband, the worst part about this was the generational trauma.
Was it Turning Red?
Perhaps.
That was my guess.
Yeah.
As well.
I said the generational pain and hurt. I am still sitting here. I am traumatized right now by the generational just trauma and hurt and pain. That for me, and I this is my personal opinion, that was the hardest part of that movie. And actually, once I really took time to take it all in, I sat and I had a very long and deep talk with my daughter, because I told her, I want you. I have expectations for you. But your life is your life. And there are going to be times where my expectations don't meet your reality. It's going to happen. You're going to be 14 one day. And when that happens, how do you think we should handle that? And I'll tell you how I think we should handle that. And how do you hope things go? And we talked about it. And what we got out of that was huge. But the generational stuff is so deep and so hurtful. And that is something that we actively in our family try to change a lot. Because it's not all bad, but we're actively trying to improve the way that we parent, even from our oldest to the triplets. We are constantly trying to improve that because we don't want to create those same cycles.
I think that's really important. I think there's I think we see all the highlight reels now, and then I think also sometimes that goes back to oh, well, what happened, because we didn't have that when we were kids. And so there was no comparison. We didn't know what a good family looks like or a bad family until we were teenagers, and we actually got to hang out with our kids, our friends' parents or whatever. And I think it's important to, like, for me, one of my biggest goals in sort of avoiding some of the stuff that mostly my mom did to me is I really just want my kids to be like themselves. Like, I really just want them to be able to figure it out. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do for kids in our professions and as parents. It's just kind of like, well, what do you like? What are you into? What do you, and not like, not force anything that we want them to be, because we all have wishes and hopes and dreams for our kids, but that's our stuff, not theirs.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think anytime you have difficult content, whether it's a movie, I was kind of curious about it too when I heard the criticism. I'm like, all right, I really want to watch this together. I'm not going to sit her down in front of it, and all the developmental stuff too. I have a 9-year-old, went way over her
Yeah.
head, and I'm so thankful for that. But we did it together. We watched it together. Some things she noticed, had a question, and then we were there to provide it. Or if we're navigating, a difficult topic, or I know later, grief, loss, those types of things, not my favorite thing to talk about.
No.
But giving the scaffolding, I think, is really important, because you have an underdeveloped brain. It's not at maturity. There's going to be gaps. There's going to be things you don't want them to fill in on their own. So I think it's okay. Even kids we work with, kids with developmental delays, I think it's okay to meet them where they are, but to make sure you just provide that support is key.
I think there's a lot of barriers that go into identifying and even seeing the intergenerational patterns that we live with every day. I think some of it is you don't zoom out long enough to see it, right? Like, it's just always been this way. So, I have no point of reference. I have nothing to compare it to. I think it was funny, so I was at that conference, and then I was I took a couple of days of PTO, and was talking to my brother-in-law. And he said, so when you're on vacation, how do you like to work? Which is such a weird question, right? How do you work when you're on vacation? And I was like, well, when I'm on vacation, I like to do creative work. So podcast stuff, or trainings that I'm working on, or I'm low key working on a book right now. And so all those different things. And I love to do those creative things. And in that moment, I realized I was Roy Smith on vacation. I was like, no! It was when the world comes crashing in, you're a lot more like your parents.
It's like those insurance commercials.
Yes, you're becoming your dad. Yes,
I like those.
There are ways in which we are like our parents, whether we want to or not, and we're gonna do some of the stuff to our parents or to our kids that, if we've gone to therapy, we've probably talked about in therapy, and we have no insight into it whatsoever. And I think that falls back to sort of where we begin, this concept of fast thinking versus slow thinking. And when we are fast thinking, we are reacting, we are surviving, we are using that scarcity mindset. We're just doing whatever we can to get through this moment and get to the next checkpoint. And I feel so often we just fall into that pattern of fast thinking because the demands on our time are excessive. We work all the time. Kids are a lot. Baseball is a full-time job on top of everything. Just all these extra things. And so we fall into fast thinking just as out of a survival mechanism. But I think when we're in fast thinking, that's when we fall back on some of those intergenerational
Old habits
those
come back
old
through.
habits, those intergenerational patterns show back up again. And we don't need to, in the moment, draw ourselves out of fast thinking, because I think that's really hard to do, but building into our lifestyle moments of reflection, moments of reevaluation, falling back when we can have catch our breath, sit down with our partner, whoever our co-parenting alliance is, look at our ecosystem and see what resources can we draw upon right now during this time of survival, and what's working and what's not, and what ways am I acting like my dad right now? Or how am I becoming my mother in this exact moment, which isn't something that many of us want to do, right? We're all oh, no, I'm not like that. But we are. In a lot of ways, we are.
Yeah.
And so to own it, acknowledge it, and then figure out how, with that sense of ownership, we can create a new tradition moving forward.
Humility is definitely a parent's.
But who enjoys
biggest
humility?
I don't know there anyone is. I don't know there is anyone, but it's definitely it's helpful. It's definitely one of the biggest parts of successful parenting, if there is such a thing.
is that tolerance.